It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Take Command Podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here. In a weird way, Logan, it feels like we haven't done one of these in a while.
It does feel that way. I mean, we kind of haven't, I guess, because we did like the live one and then we kind of bumped, you know what I mean? So it has been a couple of more days than normal. Let's just say that.
Yeah. How you doing? What's up, friend? We want to just catch up real quick or we want to just get this mailbag?
Good, just busy. Rugby season starting for my son, so that's always a fun deal. Yeah. So we're in it. We're in the kids sports stuff, so.
Yeah, well, I feel like once that starts as a parent, it doesn't stop till they leave the house. So, good luck with that for the next many years, decade of your life. So what we got today for you is a mailbag. And we got some really great questions this week, some really interesting ones. And just real quick, if your question doesn't get selected, here's the best way to get your question selected on the show. Be creative. Creativity wins. We will definitely attack some of the questions that we got, 3-4 of a similar type of question, because obviously that's what you guys want to know. And some of those are on the hottest topics that are around the Commanders, some of which we've talked about at various depths before, but as circumstances change, new players come in, we get closer to the draft, all that kind of stuff. Like, I understand that folks can't listen to every episode. You may have missed it. Totally get it. But if you want to 100% hear your question on this show, we reward the creativity. So with that, Logan, let's start with one that I think perked our ears up pretty good. And this one comes from David in Fairfax, who enjoys watching the show on YouTube and is a big fan of your menacing laugh, Logan, when the sign out message is occurring.
Yeah.
Just when I can't seem to land the plane. So Dave, David asks, I wanted to get your and Logan's thoughts on the RAS, Relative Athletic Score, measurement tool. Obviously, it's only one data point, up to 10 is how the score works. But in 2024, every player the Commanders drafted who tested enough to get a raw athletic score, which is everybody but Daniels and Newton, they didn't complete the testing, scored above 8, with the lowest being Sainer still at 8.45, and the next lowest being John Baptiste at 9.22. Only 1 year and a smallish sample size, but what are your thoughts on, one, how useful RAS is as a tool more generally? What are its strengths and weaknesses? And two, how much value do you think Peters and DQ assign to it/similar measurement tools? Can we infer anything about their big board based on it? I.e., could we just toss anyone below like a 7 off our big boards, or is it more nuanced than that? Thanks for your time. Keep up the awesome work that you, Logan, Anthony, and the whole Team 980 team do. He also wants us to ask Trevor Sikkema a question, but we'll save that one for next time we talk to Trevor Sikkema.
Sure. I think that's a really good question. I think it just kind of gets to like a kernel of like pre-draft process that I find to be really fascinating, where it's like, do you go athletic upside or do you go based on film? And as we talked about before, the film is a huge element. It's 90% of what you do. And I think what the RAS score does or should do is just inform kind of like what your eyes are seeing on film. And so do I use the RAS score? Yes, but I use it in like maybe a different way. Like I want to just make sure like the person's meeting kind of minimal thresholds. So as long as the RAS score is not like a 3, I'm usually like, okay. And even if it is a 3 and it's like, let's say it's like a run stopping defensive tackle, like Yahya Black from Iowa had a 3.4 RAS score, right? Like I'm not worried about that because the dude's 6'6", he's 340. Like, I don't want him to be the best athlete of all time. He's not running 40 yards ever in a game. Like, he's eating a double team on first down, right? So, like, that kind of stuff is okay because stylistically, like, it's fine, right? And so a couple other things too. So, like, that's kind of the high level thought, maybe the answer to the first part of that question. The second part of the question is I do think the RAS score biases towards bigger players, larger players, because it factors in like height, weight, and arm length. So, for example, like Zeke Biggers from Georgia Tech, who's a defensive tackle also, he tested very well, right? But he had like a 9.56 RAS score. And this is a good person to kind of use as a case study in this example, right? He's big. He's 6'5 and a half. He's 330 pounds. He's got 35-inch arms. He's got the biggest wingspan at the combine. I think it's 35 and an eighth inch, something like that, right? So he's a huge human. He moves around well. But then when you watch the film, he's like incredibly raw. He's got some issues, deficiencies technically to his game. And you're like, this is the way I would use this in this example, right? Do I like Zeke Biggers as a prospect? Yeah. Is it because his RAS score is high? Probably. But where am I going to take a shot on that with the film being what it is? Probably in like the 5th, 6th, 7th round. As a guy that's going to be like a developmental, rotational guy that's going to get with my coaching staff. And then we're going to make a move. And hopefully in 2 or 3 years, he's developed into a serviceable starter. That's how I would use that. Another example of that would be like Darren Porter from Iowa State. Everyone knows him. He's the corner. He's, I think he's 6'3". He's like 200 pounds. He's got 33-inch arms. He ran I think it was a 4.28 40. He had like a 40-inch vertical. Like all the metrics were off the chart. He's a freak, right? But he's only played corner for 1 year. So when you watch film, like he's only played corner for 1 year. So like all of the measurables are there, but you also have to catch it in this like weird space of saying, even though physically he can do literally quite anything you want, he hasn't played corner enough. So like when you watch his film, like the instincts aren't there. So I have to understand that despite his athletic profile, like I have to understand that there's a developmental curve associated with that. And again, I do think they bias towards larger players. So he's 6'3", he's 200 pounds. It's a huge corner. Again, that is going to inflate his RS score. A good example from last year is Johnny Wilson, the receiver from Florida State. He tested really well, but 4.5, what was it? A 4.55 he ran last year.
I think something like that. Yeah.
It's a good time for a receiver, but it's not a great time. It becomes a great time because of his size. And I think like there are minimum thresholds for receivers, for corners that I think people often ignore because they see the RAS. But I'm also like, if a corner or a receiver is almost running a 4.6 40, that I don't care how big you are, it doesn't matter, right? It shouldn't matter. And so I think that's something else that people need to factor in is like when I watch a receiver, they need to be able to decelerate and accelerate like a receiver. I don't care. The size to me is less important, for example.
Yeah. And then you look at a guy like Sanders still, and it's like, okay, his score is hurt by the fact that he's not very big, but his actual athleticism, the testing numbers, and the way it then comes out on the field is pretty elite, especially for a guy his size.
Elite. I mean, it's elite, right? Like,
he's a phenomenal mover. I mean, he didn't run like a 4.2. I'm trying not to use the word elite as much, but like it's really, really, really good. Like he was super fast.
I'm really glad you brought up Mike Sanders still, right? Because he tested fine, but I don't know what his RAS score. Did the guy listen?
It was like 8.3, I think is what it said.
Right, which is like it's a fine RAS score. But I think you couple that with the film work, with his instincts on the field, and all of a sudden, like that RAS score is not reflective of him as a player. It is reflective of thresholds, but it's not reflective of him as a player. And I think that's where people get a little bit funky with RAS score. Like this guy's like, I always think it's interesting. Like Jalen Travis, the tackle from Iowa State, he's 6'7" and a half, so he's almost 6'8". He's 340 pounds. His RAS score is like a 9.71. I like him as a prospect quite a bit, but he does have some athletic limitations at the tackle position that give me pause, right? He's a little bit heavy footed, and that stuff doesn't necessarily show up in the aggregate of that score. You know what I'm saying? Like the DB instincts don't show up in the aggregate of that score.
Right. And so, for instance, I got Sanders Stills like full profile pulled up, right? And it's 4 categories, the RAS, how it works, right? So you have composite size grade, composite explosive grade, composite speed grade, and then a composite agility grade. And it grades each individual thing. So he's red in the size category because which is considered very poor, height and weight. Explosive grade, elite. He's got a 40-inch vertical and a 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump, which is
Did he really?
insane.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah.
So those are very green numbers, 9.45, 9.55. Then in the speed grade, they actually break down the 40 into a 40, a 20, and a 10. His 10 split was a 1.51. That's green. That's elite.
Pretty good.
That's 9.25. But his 20 was 2.6, which is a 7.23. And his 40 was a 4.47, 7.78, which composites into a green, but great, not elite grade. And then the agility grade, 3-cone is yellow. He only scored a 6. And his shuttle was a 9.41, which was elite. And in some ways, those two numbers don't go together. Because like those two numbers, they test very similar things, not the exact same things. Your bendiness versus just your ability to stop and start as you weave your way around the 3-cone. Like that's a little bit different. But it also, we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this. Part of it is how good is the person at the actual drill? Like some of these drills, if you become really good at them, they become party tricks. Like, and I know this as a fitness coach, I can demo any footwork drill you want in a ladder that I've done, and I can do it in a way that make my clients go, oh my God, there's no way I'm going to do that. That's too fast. But like, I'm not actually that fast. I've just done that footwork pattern a million times. Now go make me translate that into being a football player, and I wouldn't be a very good football player, Logan, for many reasons. But my fast feet would not, that I can do through a ladder drill, do not really help me that much. And so if you've rehearsed these drills a million times and you score better on them because you put that kind of effort into the combine, like that's great. That shows a level of dedication. And we've talked about that combine time, right? Like part of the combine is will you put the effort and time in? But you might spend more time on the 40 than you do on the 3 cone. If that reflects in the testing based off of how good you are at that specific thing, that may not actually be an accurate reflection of your athletic ability, which is why you are using this to then be in conjunction with the film to actually break down the prospect. That said, that's a weakness. A strength of RAS is it is a relative athletic score. Yeah. Everyone else is going through the same process. And so instead of looking at what is this? Potentially as many as 3, that's 5, 10 data points, because Mikey didn't bench, so that's a blank spot on his. But up to 10 different data points, if I can composite them into one and then go down a position list and be like, okay, who are the best athletes at this position? It is a way to comb through the data that is a little more efficient and effective and kind of prevents you from just having number overload with 10 different testing points.
No, I think it's exactly right. And again, like I do think it biases towards larger players. That's one of the things that I keep coming back to with it. But if you know that, then you understand kind of what you're getting. And I think again, like, do I use it in the evaluation? Like when they've got a good RAS, like it perks me up. Like, so for example, there's a receiver from Nebraska, Nayor, I think is his name, Neyor. And he's 6'3", he's almost 6'4". He's got 34-inch arms. He's 220 pounds. He ran a 4.4 at the combine, right? So that perks you up. And then you realize his RAS, like compositing the jumps and the change of direction, is a 10. So like, I've watched him a ton. I really like his change of direction. I like his profile. So again, there's a guy that if I've got a 4th round pick and I want to take a flyer on somebody who I think has X upside traits, like his film's okay because he played at Nebraska, right? So they don't throw the ball a ton. The quarterback was just okay. So now I say to myself, like, shoot, if we can clean up some of this technical stuff, like that could be an X receiver in the 4th, 5th round, depending on the value there. And I'm going to take a shot on it because he does have this tremendous athletic profile. And I think the film, that's one that's interesting because I think the film supports it. I think it's the same thing with Porter. Right? Like the DB from Iowa State, like the film supports the athletic traits. It's just, are you comfortable with the instincts? And I think maybe that's another good point to bring up here. RAS score for defensive linemen to me is way more valuable, like defensive end specifically, way more valuable than for like, it's important for corner, it's important for receiver, but like the 2 maybe most important positions for RAS for me are tight end and defensive end. Like if you have a good RAS score in those positions, like there's a long track record of those guys doing well at the next level just because they're physical freaks. So like Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M has a 10 RAS score, right? So like it shows up on film. He's a physical freak. The production doesn't necessarily support it, but like I'm going to take a shot on that. And I'm okay taking it a little bit higher with that as opposed to Nayor or one of these other players because he's playing a position where I think it's better. So, like Terrence Ferguson, the tight end from Oregon, I think it's like a 9.7 RAS score. Like he moves up my board a little bit because again, that profile does better in those positions for whatever reason. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of is a funny thing. And I feel like we talked about this at the end of the process last year. Every football position is very, very different. Yeah. And like the idea that a scout is going to be great at, and quarterback is like the most different. So the idea that you could be really good at scouting one position and this tool might be really valuable in doing that at one position, and then it doesn't apply at all or applies much less to another, like, duh. They're asked to do very different things. Sure. You're building a company with accountants and janitors and whatever else happens in companies. Congrats on your good books and your clean office hallways. But like you're building very, very different profiles. So it would make sense that is the case. And look on the height, weight versus bigger players thing. Sometimes that matters. Sometimes it doesn't. If I've got a receiver who's 6'4" with crazy long arms and he's only got a 36-inch vertical versus a 5'10" guy with a 42-inch vertical, well, like in some ways, the taller guy with the reach and everything, that's going to be more consistent versus having to summon that max vertical every single time from an explosiveness standpoint. So like there's different times that all of this stuff is going to come in, which is why ultimately the number one tool in all the evaluation for every position is the film. That's the basis of everything. Yeah. Then the second most important thing is probably the interviews. Like who is this person as a person? Interviews not only with that player, but the interviews of the people around that player at their school, whatever other, background information you can get on them. Then you go into how do we verify those things with other data? And that's where the testing comes in. That's where RAS comes in. And on some levels, like that is, I don't want to say position proof, but like the weight you then give those things changes based off the position. But that tends to be, I think, the order on every position.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking through it right now. Like this is kind of interesting thought experiment. Like all of the metrics that they're testing at the combine test really like acceleration. Obviously the 5-10-5 deceleration to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
But it's not really like sports specific deceleration. And if you think about the positions I just listed out, like they're positions that are really good accelerators, like defensive end, like it's a strong corollary to the test they're going to run. You're going to run straight. You're going to jump. You're going to, you know what I'm saying? It's all of this kind of outward expenditure. And then like for a receiver, for example, like there's no deceleration metric in there, right? There's nothing that measures that at a high level. So for me, like I would like to see more of that kind of testing for that position. And that's what the field works for, is that you can see how they decelerate when they do their stuff, but there's no testing there for it. And so that's where I'd say like you're saying there's different demands of different positions. That's 100% true. This testing, the type of testing they've chosen to do at the combine for many, many years, reflects a specific type of athletic quality that, again, transfers really well to people that have to explode off the football. And that's really why defensive linemen, it transfers so well for them.
I'm glad you brought that up. We did an episode of Train with the Best probably 6 weeks ago about that very thing, because there was a really good article in The Athletic. Hilariously, it happened right before the Luka trade. Because Luka was one of the guys that was featured in it, but it was like Luka, Jokic, and someone like Mahomes, like some of the dad bod athletes, and how if you take other measurements, those guys are actually elite. And the P3 performance testing in I think it's in LA or California, they've been doing that kind of testing for years, and they have like force plates and they have all this stuff that the NFL will never put on television. There's no way. Like teams would love it. I don't know, the agents would be like, yeah, we're good with all this. But like it can help predict injuries. It can do all this kind of stuff, and force plate testing and this testing and that testing, deceleration, change of direction, angular momentum or angular acceleration, like all this stuff that is actually really important to the sport, but is not as easy to test and not as simple. But when you look at guys like Jokic, guys like Doncic, like Jokic has one of the worst verticals in the history of the NBA and in the history of P3's testing. But in other phases, he is super elite, like reaction time, things like that become really important. So if you want more on that, I got another podcast for you, but it's and also Rustin Dodd's article in The Athletic about the dad bod craze is definitely worth a read if you're more interested in that. Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. So this one from Upweller_Josh on Instagram, who hit me at Hoffman.sports, Logan. Basic question. We've answered a version of this the past couple of years around draft time, but it's worth re-upping the answer. We got a lot of new audience. Hey, everybody new. Thanks for listening. In the draft, should AP/Quinn go for best player available or draft for need? And I think this is actually worth discussing because this is a very different draft than last year for Washington. And we've talked around this topic quite a bit over the last couple of months of doing this draft work now, where Washington last year picking second, knew exactly the direction they wanted to go. This year, you were and knew that option would be available. This year, you're very much at the mercy of the board. And so this question becomes a little bit more complicated. And I think it's time for our yearly reminder of how this actually works in a draft room and how this question on some level answers itself.
Yeah, so I think this is it's always good to kind of talk through this. And I think people, they think best player available, like they think, I don't really know what they think, but they have this perception that it's just like you throw need out the window completely. And that's just not, frankly, how it works, because best player available is different, A, different on every big board. Like there's some consensus, right? Like there's like, hey, when you list the players out 1 to 300, there's going to be a general consensus, but you're going to have outliers there, right? So obviously your big board's going to differ from other teams. So best player available for me is not necessarily the best player available for Craig.
Right. And that could be from scouting differences. We might see the player differently. Or if we run different schemes, that player that's awesome for you might not be worth it for me.
Yeah, and I think that's just a good point to understand. Like, Dan at the Combine was talking about the type of edge rusher that he prefers, right? Guys that can really get off the ball. So that, again, like I'm not saying they're going to draft a guy who's going to have a good 10, but if you look at his history, he does value guys that have that ability to kind of juice off the football, right, at a high level. So he's probably going to value that position. Adam Peters is going to value that trait a little bit more. So best player available shifts a little bit. Also, I've talked to a head of college scouting or a player personnel guy, and he was just like, need factors into best player available. So, for example, like if I'm a quarterback needy team, quarterbacks get a little bit more value. You multiply them by like 1.2 on your board. Again, like whatever your grade is, let's say my grade's 20, right? You multiply them by 1.2, and eventually that gets them into like probably a top 10 range for most quarterbacks. You say, okay, so now this quarterback, which we need, because we multiplied it by 1.2, is now in our top 10 of players available. So there is some kind of fungibility there. And again, it's a subjective thing also. So like, for example, at 29, right? I think Adam Peters, and I'm going to give him his flowers here, has done a great job of saying like this, we've got our roster to a really good baseline. We talked about it on our last episode about how in free agency, they kind of really, with all the people they brought in, raised the floor, right? They said, hey, this is our new floor. And now we can kind of put the accents on the roster, hopefully through the draft. And so for me at 29, like best player available now looks like who is going to bring the most athletic upside to the defense, probably, right? Again, like let's say that, for example, like Josh Simmons is there at 29 and he's hypothetically, I have no idea what their big board looks like, but let's say he's a top 10 player on their big board and he's there at 29. You're still going to take Josh Simmons, right?
Yeah, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State.
He's the best player on your board, hypothetically, at that spot. However, I do think that because of the signing of Laramie Tunsil, that becomes a little bit less needy, right? So, like, let's say, for example, it's like Josh Connerly from Oregon, and you say he's the 30th player on your board. There's good value there taking him at 29, but now, because of how my roster dynamics have shifted, I'm going to value probably edge, probably safety, probably corner a little bit more. So like Siobhan Ravel from ECU, if he's available there, like you're probably like, this is the best player on our board now, even though Connerly and him have similar grades because of our need and because of the kind of player we're looking for at this spot, we'd probably go in that direction. So that's where need, best player available, gets a little bit wishy-washy, in my opinion, because it does shift based on your team needs. And so I think it's important to understand that just kind of contextually going into this. And now what I think is, based on what they've done in free agency, you probably shift to like saying edge, corner, safety. Like I do think those are probably the direction they go with the pick. But like, for example, if they say, oh, there's a defensive tackle here that we really, really like, I don't know, if Walter Nolan drops to 29, for example, and you've got, a top 10 grade on him, I don't care what your roster looks like, you're going to take that player. Because again, the value there is astronomical compared to your grade and where you're picking.
Which is what they did last year with Johnny Newton. Yeah. I don't know that they went into that draft being like, we're going to draft John Allen's replacement, but Johnny Newton was by far the best player on their board, which we saw in the behind the scenes stuff afterwards that the team put out, the commander's log, because, they obviously blocked out most of the names, but ultimately they had their tiers up on the board in the war room. And Johnny Newton, after they took him, they took his name off the top tier. He was the only one left. And so they got lucky there based off what they thought of the player, that he was available at the top of the second round for them and was able to be drafted, even though they had, probably a top 15, top 18 grade. Like, you don't hand out 32 first round grades. It's not how the grading system works for most teams. There's kind of a raw grade, if you will. And so what need becomes is the tiebreaker. Is okay, and you did, I think, such a good job last year explaining this, and we'll probably do another version of this year where we go through like your top couple of tiers, where like you build your board as if you were a general manager. It's part of your scouting process that you do, and it's really insightful because it's like, okay, these are the players in the top A bucket. these are the players in the B bucket. These are the players in the C bucket. And so if you get on the board and there's a player in the A bucket available and there's only one, you take the A player.
Yeah.
If you're the Commanders at 29 and you have 5 players left in the B bucket, then you go, okay, which one of these players helps us the most? Who's the best player available for us?
Right.
And that's where that tiebreaker comes in of like, we consider these players all pretty equal. Otherwise, one of them would be down a tier, or one of them would have been up a tier. And then this guy, for us, we think he's the best guy. And that's where the positional need, or maybe there's another factor. I mean, it doesn't always have to come down to that, because maybe you kind of equally need a corner and an edge or whatever. And I really liked our meeting with that guy. I have a gut feeling about 100%. It. And I'm Adam Peters, and I'm going to trust my gut. Like, it's not all science. And I think that's the other thing too, is like, people want this all to be the same uniform for every team. This is an art in a lot of ways. If this was a science, then people would have figured out some science by now. But in a sport with 22 guys on the field at once and schematics and all that kind of stuff constantly changing, there's no way it can be a science, because the target that you're trying to hit at all these positions is constantly moving. The last thing I'll just say about that is, because of that and because of the way the contracts are structured, you just go best player available, because you're always a year or two away from having a need at every position in the sport, quarterback 100%. Hopefully excluded, when you have a guy like Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, and I think I couldn't have said it better. And I think maybe we should have done the tier thing to start this, but I think that's a huge element in understanding like what we're talking about. And I think you did a great job of understanding it, so I'm not going to repeat it. But the other thing too that I think is incredibly important is like, it is the subjective element of evaluation is important to understand, but also kind of the soft science of human being and relationships. So I remembered this story while you were talking, because it reminded me of this, but like Alfred Morris, I remember when he was coming to Washington, like he got drafted in the 6th round, and I just said, how did you find this guy? Like, what was, I was talking to, I forget who I was talking about. How did you find him? Because he obviously was balling out that year, right? He's running hard. He's a great kid. And basically the guy was like, you know what, it was between him and another running back in the 6th round. And they went to Bobby Turner, and Bobby's like, I like Alfred better. He's a better kid. Let's draft him. That was what it was. Like there was no difference in film. My personal relationship was better with Alfred at the time.
That matters, right?
And
because
it's important, right?
Think of the coaches that you played for that you liked and liked you, and what they poured into you, and thus what they're able to get out of you as a player, versus like if you have any level of reluctance coaching a guy, like you're not going to give that player the best. It's not fair to the player. It's not fair to the team. And so that stuff ultimately matters a lot, especially if it's between two guys at one position, like who the position coach feels like he can get the most out of, who they can reach. Like, that's pretty important.
And I think that's just really important for fans to understand, is like at 29, for example, like there's going to be a lot of good players like Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College, like James Pierce might be there, right? And so what's the distinguishing factor in those guys? Because there's pros and cons to both players. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for them to be like, we like player of those two, player X better, right? And that's the way you go. And people, Mel Kiper's going to go, oh, I have a higher grade on James Pierce Jr., but he never met with James Pierce Jr. He never talked to him, right? And if James Pierce Jr. came here, great. If Donovan Ezeraku came here, great. But that's based on my evaluation. I've never met the guy, right? So if my personal relationship or my personal understanding of fit is better with one player, like that's best player available for me. So like there's all the film, all the testing, the meetings are important, fit, schematic fit, all that kind of gets woven in and stirred up and bakes this beautiful thing that is best player available. And need is factored in there somewhere, but how much need you're dosing into this little baking concoction you made is dependent on team and dependent on kind of organizational philosophy. And so that's, again, like when you look at Philly, I think they're a great example. They're always drafting quote unquote best player available, right? But in reality, they're drafting for need because of the reason you just talked about, because they know that, Lane Johnson's going to retire in 2 years. And so they want to make sure they got someone in-house, an offensive lineman to develop. And for 2 years, while Lane's kind of playing out his contract, they did the same thing with Jason Kelsey. Like, that's their organizational philosophy. And so because Adam Peters is so new, we haven't really determined what that is yet. But we do know one thing that's really important. More than the RAS question is that they want the right kind of person. And so that's something that we won't know until they draft the guy. And usually, like, did you see this is a little bit of an aside, but did you see the Kinlaw interview on the Commanders YouTube page?
Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah.
Like, talk about a dude who is a commander from a mentality standpoint. And so obviously that's something that they value incredibly. And so like, we won't get to see that side of these guys until after they've signed. So again, best player available versus need, little fungible, but I think you did a good job, Craig, at talking about the tiers and kind of how that all works together. So
thank you, as did you in all that. The last thing too is like, can you over-index on one position? Yeah, I think when the Commanders took 4 straight first round defensive linemen, for instance, and they're not the only team that's done this, right? Like the Lions famously took, 4 receivers in a row. Now for them, it was because like three or whatever of them busted. So it didn't really work out, but like they had top 5 picks and took a bunch of receivers in a row and it didn't work out. But like then you wind up with some contract issues and like how much money, if they all work out, how much money are we investing in one position group? What does that leave? And like that leaves you thin elsewhere. So like, yes, it is possible to over index at one position. If the Commanders take a defensive tackle at the first overall pick or their first pick this year, that's back-to-back years is not going to over-index you for Jerzon Newton and Walter Nolan or whoever that might wind up being. So the Commanders are definitely not in risk of doing that. And ultimately, like those are good problems to have. If you hit on too many draft picks and you have to figure out the contracts a couple years down the line, okay. Hopefully you can maybe trade a guy and get some return, or you can figure it out. But like, first things first, hit on those draft picks, and that's something else that I think is worth mentioning. Last thing for this, we can go through this quickly, and then because I think we're going to get into potentially one of the potential answers here to wrap up the show, Logan. But Jay Buddy asks, what is now the Commanders' number one positional need? So now we've had this need versus BPA discussion, and we've said that need influences who is actual BPA. Who's getting the biggest point multiplier on the positional need here after free agency?
Yeah, I think that again, it's a good question, and I think we kind of alluded to it there just briefly. I think it's one of those defensive spots, and I guess I'd probably put receiver in there as of right now. Like for example, if there's a really good football player, I'm trying to think of the receivers that I have graded high.
Is Mbuka high enough for you?
Mbuka is a good player. I don't think he's there, but again, like that's a weird selection with Mbuka to me, because to me he's like a pure slot, and you already have Debo here. Like I don't think he plays outside. So again, like that for my big board for the Commanders, I put him down a little bit lower than someone I think could play outside. Like
right.
Inhuman Wari from Stanford is a true X. I would probably have him a little bit lower in terms of pure skill, but maybe in this example, or Higgins, right, from Iowa State, maybe you bump that guy's value because you think he's a better pure outside guy, right? And that's what happens, right? It's the same thing with like nickel versus outside corner, right? They're different positions, and I think that's something that the national media, in my opinion, doesn't do a very good job of, is distinguishing, saying like, hey, this stylistic fit for Mbuka is not right? It doesn't fit his skill set. It doesn't fit what he's good at. Like this other player who we've drafted is a better fit kind of for what we're looking for. Yeah, but I'd probably say those 4 positions as of right now.
I will say real quick on that, this is something that I want to discuss with you soon on a show. I thought Derek Klassen made a really interesting point on the Athletic Football show that I was listening to. I think it's their Monday show, when he talked about the Seahawks having JSN and Cooper Kupp now. Yeah. And it's like, well, and Robert Mays was like, is this weird because they're both guys that primarily line up in the slot? And Derek goes, so many of these offenses are so condensed now that your outside guy is lining up inside the numbers anyway. Yeah. And so having 2 slot receivers is actually not as bad of a thing. I think that would be fun to explore in general and fun to explore with the Commanders. So I'm putting that thought pin in your head.
Sure.
That knowing you'll now think about that all week, and we'll talk about it like next week or something. But I think that is like the point being, for the purpose of this question, like is very scheme dependent. Like some, and also like, what does that mean for your cornerbacks if a lot of offenses are coming, inside the numbers more and demanding more space, having more two-way goes? What do you want in your cornerback? Is that why a guy like Mike Sanderstill maybe had a little more success outside than people thought he could? So like just fun thought experiment, and shows you the adaptive nature and the moving target nature of doing these evaluations.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% right. And again, like it goes back to kind of what goes into your best player available analogous, even at a position, right? Like, are we looking for what skill set are we looking for? What kind of guy does Jaden like to throw to? Like, what kind of person are you? All those things for a receiver, right? In corner, like everyone talks about Dan wanting like these big, long, tall corners, but I think he just likes good football players out there, right? Guys that can tackle, guys that take good angles, guys that understand coverage and can play the football. And so maybe that shifts your evaluation and what you value there at 29. And defensive end, I think, is another one that, like, in this draft specifically, like, there's going to be a lot of good value there. And so people say, oh, well, you signed all of these defensive linemen, and you did. But I think it's also important to you need to find a little bit of a seasoning, right? I think Jacob Martin, the guy they signed in free agency, has a little bit of that kind of pass rush juice. But I think you want somebody that you can kind of get in-house and kind of build around at that spot. And I do feel like at 29, there will be good value there, potentially for a really quality edge player, and so that's kind of where I'd go. And I think also safety too. Like, there's some really good kind of nickel safety hybrids in the draft. And I think one of those guys, because of, again, positional value is so weird, safety tends to be undervalued a little bit. I could slide there at 29 and get a really good football player.
Yeah, like I don't think the Lions are mad that Brian Branch fell to them a couple of years ago, for instance. Like, you get a good one. Yeah, again, be good at your job. Draft a great football player. It doesn't matter the position. You're not going to go wrong. That does bring us to a conversation about the edge players, though, to wrap up the show. Wrapping up here on Take Command, Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here. And so we've said now that corner, edge, those are probably the positions that most likely to garner some attention from Washington at 29, but we'll see if a receiver falls or whatever.
Sure.
And it's definitely possible. Or if there's just some stud in a position that is not one of need, then, as we've established, if he's a tier above everybody else, you take him. But assuming putting that aside for a second, Logan, I thought this was an interesting way to ask a question about the edge position from the far bod. Do you think they have a plan for an edge pass rusher before the draft, having missed out on Azeez Ojulari? Ojulari signed a $4 million one-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles, of course, the former Giants pass rusher. He's a guy that both of us had talked about a little bit. He's only 25 years old. Kind of a weird market for him. Maybe there's some other stuff going on there that we don't know about, but good luck, because he's staying in the NFC East, but not coming here. So with him off the board, what do you think about their ability to address this position more than they already have? And again, I'm not saying that they've done an amazing job of finding some diamond in the rough here, but they've signed a bunch of guys. Do you think they add more before the draft, or at this point, is it kind of draft or bust?
I mean, I think the thing that I'm kind of keeping an eye on is the Trey Hendrickson thing with Cincinnati. And part of that is because I think, like, they just signed, obviously, the two receivers to all that money. They're not going to be able to pay him. At least seems very unlikely that
they're saying they're going to start trying now that they've got the receivers done, but we'll see.
Yeah. So again, like, I think they still probably want to trade him. Obviously, I've heard from a couple of people that they're asking for a ton in terms of draft capital, which I think is kind of a non-starter at this point for Adam Peters, especially because you have to pay him afterwards. Like, the reason you're trading him is to offload the contract and get some value for him. So, like, for you to ask for a first round and a third round pick is a little excessive, especially given the new team signing him has to give him the extension. But that's one.
Which is now going to be maybe $5 million a year more than it was 3 weeks ago, because Myles Garrett signed for $40 million. So Hendrickson might have been seen as a $30 million player. Now he's probably going to be asking for 35.
Yeah. So, and again, like, I think that's kind of the player, the difference maker you're looking for. Because then when you look around the free agent landscape at the moment, I don't know if there's anybody that fit what Washington needs. And what I mean by that is, like, I think you've got some really good football players. You re-signed Cleveland Farrell, you got Dedrick Wise. Like, those dudes on first, second down are about as good as you could want, right? They're big, they're physical.
Well, especially for the price, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, that, 100% right. Like, for what you're paying, that they give you exactly what you need. They're smart football players. They're good locker room guys. Like, but there's no pass rush juice in the group, right? So you bring in Javon Kinlaw, he's going to rush on the interior probably. Obviously, Daron Payne and Jer'Zhan Newton, but I think on the edge you need some spice, and I don't think there's any kind of guys at the moment that fit that kind of flavor bill for the Washington Commanders in terms of pass rush upside. And so that's that's one of the reasons we were talking about Ojulari as a potential fit here, because he does have some pass rush kind of nuance and excitement to his game. And right now, there's not a lot of guys like that. There is a guy, Von Miller's available, but he hasn't really looked the same since he hurt his ACL. What was that, 2 years ago?
Yeah, he's had a bunch of injuries the past couple of years. He's like 35 years old. So almost 30. He'll be 36 when the season starts. So
again, I'm not sure there's any move that they make here in free agency at the position. Again, like if there's a trade, like that's the one thing about Adam. Like you can't say never, because he does a good job of finding trade partners and trade opportunities. So I do think that's something just to kind of keep an eye on. But in terms of the market at the moment, I think it's kind of settled, and I'm actually okay with it, because I do think when you look at the draft this year, one of the positions of strength is the edge rusher class. There's a lot of guys in this group that have a lot of juice, a lot of upside. They're good football players. And I think you probably go that direction in the draft this year because of that. And we just talked about that a little bit. So that's where, I think in a perfect world, they would have found somebody, but they didn't. And that's okay, because that's part of what happens in free agency. And so now I think you look to the draft, or you look to right after the draft, because one of the things that happens when a position is strong in the draft is good players end up getting cut, right, to accommodate the new player coming in. And you can find kind of, what do they call that? The third wave of free agency, the fourth wave of free agency right after the draft. So I think there's still time to find that kind of piece for the defensive line.
Yeah, this was another good one on this topic from Steven.Healer. Says, if an edge doesn't fall to us in our first few picks, how concerned would you be with our edge rotation? I think that's another good way to frame it, right? Is like, if this is it, are they screwed? Are they in trouble? Are they suboptimal? And I think I'd probably go suboptimal, because now all of a sudden you're talking about having to generate a lot of pressure, right? You're talking about having to blitz a lot more, or you're hoping for a resurgent season from Daron Payne in year 2 in the scheme. You're hoping Johnny Newton takes a huge leap, and you're hoping that your pass rush, the Kinlaw, like finds the form that is potentially there based off of his traits, et cetera. So you're just hoping that those 3 interior guys become your primary source of pressure in a way that they have never had before. Because I think that is a more realistic hope than one of these edge guys all of a sudden having a monster season. And so that is suboptimal. That is, there's no doubt about it. That would not be ideal. There is something to edge pressure. And it also depends on the quarterback. Some quarterbacks feel it worse from the edge. Some guys feel it worse from inside. Like, you just don't have any kind of dominant guy that you feel really good about saying, if this guy gets a one-on-one in a passing situation, we're winning. And that's not where you want to be as a defense. That said, there is still a relatively high floor, and I think they probably have improved on first and second down and some of the run stuff, where hopefully you can be in better down and distance situations, find ways to be better on the back end, and you can generate more pressure. So, like, overall, do I think that if Marshawn Lattimore is better this year, that if Dietrich Wise is an upgrade on Cleveland Ferrell, and then Cleveland Ferrell is an upgrade on whoever was backing up Cleveland Ferrell, et cetera, like, are you in a better spot than you were last year? Yes. Are you in the place that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters want to be on the defensive line? I still don't think that they're particularly close to that, because you need studs up there, and I don't think they have one. And the guy that's most likely to turn into one is Newton, but he's still young, and is I don't say he's getting a do-over on his rookie year, because he played a lot, but certainly he's still a very young player who's going through his first full offseason, because he was hurt all of last offseason.
No, I think that's 100% right. I think I feel much better about the floor of this group. And when I say that, like the floor on first, second down specifically, I think you've got guys that understand how to play the run better, are a little bit more assignment sound. And, Dietrich Wise, for all of his size and all of those things, he does have some pass rush upside. I think he's got like an 11% pass rush run rate, which is solid. I mean, it's not going to blow the doors off, but it's a solid pass rush run rate. And I'm not saying he's going to replace Dante Fowler, but you've got guys who I think are going to be more consistent for you on first, second down. It's going.
By the way, some of these guys aren't going to make the team. Like that, I think that is something that's different too, right? Is like you add in Javonte Jean-Baptiste, obviously Dorrance Armstrong. And sorry to cut you off there. It's just like there's going to be guys that we're talking about right now that, based off sheer numbers, aren't going to make the team, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I keep forgetting about Dorrance, so I'm so glad you brought him up. Is because I think Dorrance is. I think he's a better pass rusher than he showed last year. And so you couple that with Frankie, and you can get there, right? You could figure out a way. And I think that's something that Joe Wood Jr. showed earlier in the season, is that he knows how to generate pressure with double mug A gap pressures and all these different looks and overloads and things like that. So I'm pretty confident you can get to the pressure, but obviously you want an elite pass rusher. And then in answer to the question, like if you don't get an edge with your first 3 picks, I'm like, if they want to take an edge, there are enough edges to get you. So like I'm
reject the premise of the question.
Yes, I'm challenging it a little bit because like I just was looking through some of the stuff on like there's like a consensus big board. It's like draftbigboard.com or something like that. I'll give you the exact website. NFL mock draft database. And I'm on, what is this? So we're at basically the 32nd ranked edge player, right? So James Pierce Jr. is at 19, Donovan Izaraku's at 32, Nick Scorton is at 36, Landon Jackson's at 44, like Tuimalau from Ohio State's at 58, Jack Sawyer's at 46, Prince Umanniela's at 59. Like all of those guys I just mentioned are good pass rushers, right? And so if you wanted to take someone at 29, you're probably okay. Let's say you want to take someone in the third, man. Like there's good.
Well, they currently don't have a third, so that is worth mentioning, right? Yeah. Fourth, so
like Oladejo from UCLA, Josiah Stewart has some pass rush juice. Kyle Kennard has juice. Xavier Jones is a bigger edge. Jared Ivey's a bigger edge, but those guys are good football players. David Walker is an undersized guy from Central Arkansas who kind of reminds you a little bit of Graham from Philly, like undersized power rusher. Like there's dudes, right? And I'm not saying a 3rd round pick's going to come in and change your team, but one of those guys I just mentioned has enough juice to kind of change the landscape of how you feel about this defensive line, right? Just another guy with some pass rush upside. Is it ideal? No, but I do think that like with one of those first 3 picks, you can probably find somebody is basically my point. And that's like where, again, I kind of push back because it's this edge rusher class. I don't know why. I don't understand the ebbs and flows of the NFL draft and why some positions are good or not. There's just a lot of dudes this year that have juice. Yeah. And so I'm very confident they'll be able to find somebody with those picks. And again, you're relying on a rookie that's less than ideal. It still supports all the things you just said, but it adds a little bit of, again, of that pass rush upside potential. And it allows you to get another person that can create some mismatches on the defensive line.
Yeah. You mentioned, real quick, just like 30, 45 seconds. Have you watched Jacob Martin? What do you think? That kid that they brought in?
I actually played with him.
Oh, really?
Okay. Houston, yeah. So he was a guy that like I really just understands. Like he's an undersized dude. I think he played at Temple, if I remember correctly. Like undersized guy, and he understands pass rush. Like he's just like one of these guys that like when you talk to him, he's like compulsive about pass rush. Like I vividly remember sitting in the car after signing there and us driving to the facility right in Houston and him talking to me for 20 consecutive minutes about pass rush, like about how he uses his hands and how he does the stab and all this different stuff and how he sets stuff up. And like when you watch him on film, like he's got really nice kind of slinky bend. He understands how to loop. He's never really made a mark as a rusher because he's not great on first or second down, right? He's not a big dude. He's a little bit undersized. But when you watch him, like he's got the bendy kind of Gumby type qualities that I think make a good pass rusher. And obviously he's compulsive about it. Like talked to him about for 20 minutes the first second I met him, which is a lot. So I think, again, is he going to be your Dante Fowler this year? I don't know. But does he have some juice? Yeah. And so it's nice having someone like that in the fold on the roster who's a good dude and can rush the passer a little bit. And we'll see if he makes the team. But again, there are people here that they brought in that fit that mold.
Yeah, definitely much more of the, if they go 3 down, he can stand up on the edge type of player versus a hand in the dirt, going to be good on first and second down type guy. But pass rush grades are pretty good over the course of his career in PFF, and his pressure numbers are pretty solid. So we'll see if he winds up making the team. All right, that's the show for today. Thanks for the mailbag questions. Again, if you want your question in, either ask a version of the question that everyone else is, and then we'll generally answer your question, or if you want to hear your name called, creativity gets rewarded. For Logan Paulsen, I am Craig Hoffman. We'll see you later in the week as we continue to march towards the NFL draft here on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.